Hey there, dreamers. Welcome back to our channel. Before we drift into the classic journey of Perry the Platypus from Phineas and Ferb, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating seeing how far and wide our sleepy little community reaches. All right, without further ado, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. The Flynn-Fletcher home always had a special kind of rhythm to it. By day, it buzzed with invention, with energy, with endless curiosity. But when evening came, the whole house seemed to exhale, as though the walls themselves were winding down. The lamps glowed with a warm amber tone, curtains swayed gently in the night breeze, and the faint hum of crickets from outside blended into the background like a lullaby. Down in the living room, nestled against the corner where he always liked to rest, was Perry the Platypus. To anyone looking at him now, he was nothing more than an ordinary pet. His little teal body was curled neatly in his soft, oval-shaped pet bed, his bill resting gently against his paws. His breathing was steady, slow, almost in time with the gentle ticking of the family clock on the wall. He wasn't just any platypus, of course, but tonight, at least for now, there was no secret agent work, no rushing down hidden passageways, no battles against elaborate Inators. Tonight, Perry was simply Perry, a quiet, cozy presence in the Flynn-Fletcher home, content to let the world fade into stillness. Upstairs, the familiar sounds of the household carried faintly through the walls. Phineas's voice drifted out, calm but tinged with the soft excitement he always carried, even at the end of the day. "Ferb, I know what we're going to do tomorrow," he whispered, and Perry's small ear twitched as though he could hear the words perfectly. He didn't need to see them to imagine Phineas pointing at the ceiling in his usual way, already sketching out tomorrow's grand idea in his mind. Ferb's reply was soft and brief, a single word that carried the weight of agreement. Perry had always admired that about him, the way Ferb could say so much with so little. Their voices soon dimmed again, blending into the muffled rustle of bedsheets and the quiet settling of the house. Down the hall, Candace could be heard pacing briefly in her room. She muttered about her brothers, about how she was going to catch them, tomorrow for sure, her voice rising and falling as though she were rehearsing her lines for a performance no one else was watching. But soon even she began to slow down, her tone softening into a gentle grumble before fading entirely. Through all of this, Perry remained still, his half-lidded eyes following the gentle flicker of the lamplight across the room. His tail twitched once, then stilled again as the warmth of the evening wrapped itself around him. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt perfectly balanced. No chaos, no rushing, just the steady, gentle heartbeat of a family house at rest. And Perry, though he would never say it aloud, cherished these moments most of all. The living room carried its own hush, a silence that wasn't empty but rather filled with layers of gentle sounds. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint creak of the wooden floorboards as the evening air shifted, the whisper of the curtains as they swayed with the draft. Perry's ears picked up each note of this quiet symphony, not as a secret agent alert to every detail, but as a pet, lulled by the comforting normalcy of home. The clock on the mantel ticked in its steady rhythm. Each second was like a heartbeat of the room itself, slow and deliberate, pulling time gently forward without rush. Perry's eyes blinked slowly, drowsily, as if he were syncing his own breathing to the pace of that sound. He let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh, his own quiet exhale into the night. From his spot on the rug, he could see through the archway into the kitchen. The light above the sink glowed faintly, the one that Linda always left on so the house wouldn't feel too dark. Perry had come to love that light. It wasn't bright or overbearing, it was just enough, casting soft golden shadows along the counter, illuminating the fruit bowl and the faint outline of the refrigerator. It was a small detail, but in the calm of the evening it felt like a beacon of warmth. Perry's gaze wandered to the family photos hung along the wall. There was one of Phineas with his wide, triangular smile, Ferb standing beside him with his quiet, confident expression. Candace was there too, arms folded, but with the hint of a grin tugging at her lips. Perry's picture, of course, wasn't framed. He was the background companion, the one who blended into the scenery. And yet, in his heart, he knew he belonged in every picture just the same. He was as much a part of this home as the laughter, the inventions, or the long summer days. Outside the window, the stars stretched across the night sky, sharp and endless. The moon hung low, spilling pale light across the lawn and into the neighborhood beyond. Perry's eyes lingered on that glow, and for a brief moment, he imagined himself outside, padding softly through the grass, tail brushing against the dew. The thought was peaceful, but the comfort of the living room held him too firmly. He curled tighter into his bed, the edge of the blanket brushing against his side. From upstairs came the sudden sound of laughter. Phineas again, chuckling at something Ferb must have said. The noise carried lightly through the house, not disturbing the quiet, but layering it with warmth. Perry blinked once more, his heavy lids threatening to close completely. The laughter faded into muffled whispers, then to nothing at all. Now the house was nearly still. The only sound was the gentle creak of the old house breathing. The world outside already lost in the hush of midnight. Perry yawned silently, stretching his little paws forward before tucking them neatly beneath his bill. His tail shifted, just enough to fluff his bedding, then fell into place like the final stroke of a painter's brush. And as the Flynn-Fletcher home settled deeper into the quiet of night, Perry let the silence surround him. For once there were no alarms, no assignments, no hidden doors sliding open beneath him. Just the soothing embrace of a household that was, in its own way, his family. The neighborhood outside was falling into its own rhythm of rest. A car passed now and then, its headlights sweeping briefly across the Flynn-Fletcher's front lawn before vanishing into the distance. A neighbor's porch light clicked off, and the quiet chatter of crickets filled the gap it left behind. Everything beyond the walls of the house seemed to join in the same gentle agreement. This was the time for stillness. Perry shifted his position, not out of restlessness, but out of instinct. He rolled slightly to one side in his bed, his bill pressing into the soft fabric of his blanket, his paws tucked close to his chest, his eyes half shut. He looked, at least to anyone who might wander by, like the very image of serenity. His chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, and each exhale seemed to blend with the faint sighs of the wind outside. The living room, so often the stage for Phineas and Ferb's half-finished blueprints or Candace's hurried footsteps, was now perfectly clear. The coffee table was neat, the couch pillows stacked in their proper places, and the carpet glowed softly beneath the lamplight. Perry liked the room best like this, quiet and still, a backdrop of order after the buzzing chaos of daylight. In the distance, the sound of a door closing upstairs reached his ears. It was Linda, moving about softly, checking that the house was in order before finally retreating to her own room. Perry's eyes followed the sound with lazy curiosity, though he didn't move from his spot. He knew the rhythm of Linda's nightly routine as well as he knew his own. The gentle shuffle of her slippers against the floor, the muted clink of a glass of water being set on a nightstand, and then the final sigh of her mattress as she settled in for the night. These small, familiar sounds told Perry more than any clock could. It was officially bedtime. As the minutes stretched, the night deepened. Shadows lengthened across the wall, soft and unthreatening, shaped by the faint glow of the kitchen light and the lamp by the sofa. Perry's ears twitched again as he caught the faint rustle of a page turning, likely Lawrence in his study, reading before he too drifted off. Even that sound carried a calming rhythm, as if each turn of the page were pulling the house further into its dreamlike state. Perry let his eyes close fully now, though not completely lost to sleep. He was still half aware, resting in that liminal space between wakefulness and dreaming. His mind wandered in quiet, shapeless images. The shimmer of moonlight across water, the soft flutter of fireflies in the yard, the familiar sound of Phineas laughing while Ferb quietly built something marvelous in the background. None of it was happening in this exact moment, but Perry's thoughts painted them like soft brushstrokes on the canvas of his drifting mind. He shifted once more, pressing his cheek against the bedding, the fabric warm from where he'd been lying. His tail gave a single flick, a subconscious gesture of comfort before he stilled again. In the peace of the Flynn-Fletcher home, Perry had no need to keep watch, no need to slip away through secret tunnels. Here in this calm, he was simply safe. And as the night carried onward, Perry's quiet presence became part of the house itself, just another gentle rhythm in the lullaby of the Flynn-Fletcher evening. The minutes slipped by gently, unmeasured and unhurried, as Perry remained in his quiet spot. The air of the house had settled into complete calm, the kind of silence that wrapped itself around every corner like a blanket. It wasn't the hollow silence of emptiness, but the deep, comforting silence of a place where everyone inside was safe and at rest. From somewhere down the block, a dog barked once before settling again. The sound was distant, softened by the thickness of night. Perry's ear twitched at the noise, but only for a moment. His breathing remained steady, his posture loose. The world beyond the Flynn-Fletcher house could go on with its movements, but inside, nothing disturbed him. He stirred slightly, lifting his head just enough to blink at the window across the room. The moon had shifted higher now, its pale light spilling in at a new angle. The glow touched the edges of the furniture, painting the outlines of the couch and shelves in silver. For a moment, Perry's gaze lingered on that glow, his mind brushing against the memory of nights spent outside under the stars, missions that had taken him far beyond this quiet home. But the thought faded quickly, replaced with the grounded comfort of here and now. He laid his head back down, nestling deeper into the fabric of his bed. The house itself gave one last creak, as though sighing into slumber. Upstairs, the last faint noises, Lawrence placing his book aside, Candace turning once in her bed, Phineas shifting under his blanket, faded into stillness. Perry knew the rhythm of this silence as intimately as he knew his own heartbeat. It meant that the house had finally, truly gone to sleep. His eyelids drooped further, heavier now, each blink lingering longer than the last. His mind wandered lazily, painting quiet images across the canvas of his thoughts. He saw Phineas and Ferb tinkering with blueprints that seemed to float like clouds in the sky. He saw Candace yawning as she tried to keep up with them, her determination softened by drowsiness. He even imagined Linda humming softly while watering the flowers outside, her voice blending with the wind. These weren't real moments happening now, but they were fragments of what made this home feel alive. And as Perry drifted closer to sleep, those fragments felt like gentle dreams waiting to be woven together. His breathing slowed to the steady rhythm of someone surrendering fully to rest. Each rise and fall of his chest was calm, each sigh carrying him deeper into the quiet. His tail shifted once more, a final adjustment, before settling firmly in place. The faint lamplight glowed above him, casting warmth over his small, curled-up form. If anyone were to step into the room at that moment, they would see only a pet at peace, a teal platypus fast asleep, no sign of the secret life he lived beyond the walls of this house. But Perry knew, in his own quiet way, that this was as important as any mission. To be here, to be part of this family, to rest in the calm of their laughter and love, that was a duty he cherished deeply. And so, with the Flynn-Fletcher home finally still, Perry drifted fully into slumber. The night stretched softly around him, the stars watching from above, the moon casting its silver glow across the lawn. Inside in his little bed, Perry the Platypus slept soundly, wrapped in the warmth of his family's quiet evening. As Perry lay nestled in the familiar warmth of his bed, his breathing soft and steady, the stillness of the night carried him gently into memory. Sleep didn't arrive for him all at once. Instead, it drifted in quietly, like mist over water, and with it came soft recollections, snapshots of moments that had shaped his life in this home. The first memory was faint, almost like a dream itself. He could see the day he was first brought into the Flynn-Fletcher household. The memory glowed with soft edges as though lit by the hazy sunlight of summer. Linda's voice was the first sound he recalled, gentle and kind as she spoke to her children. "Now remember, taking care of a pet is a big responsibility," she had said, though her words were delivered with warmth more than warning. Phineas's eyes had lit up instantly, wide and shining with excitement. "A platypus? How cool is that, Ferb?" he'd exclaimed, his triangular head tilting as though he could hardly believe his luck. Ferb, as always, responded with a small nod and a quiet smile, the sort of understated approval that made it clear he was just as delighted. Perry could still feel the way Phineas had reached out to him for the first time. Small hands, careful, yet filled with enthusiasm. Ferb had stood nearby, calm and steady, as if already prepared to take on the role of quiet caretaker. The two boys had looked at him with such immediate fondness that Perry, even as a platypus with a secret life unknown to them, had felt a sense of belonging settle into his heart. He remembered being shown around the house. To Phineas and Ferb, it was an adventure, guiding their new pet through the hallways, pointing out the backyard, laughing as he waddled curiously around the furniture. Candace had appeared at one point, arms crossed and voice dripping with skepticism. "A platypus? Really? Out of all the pets in the world?" she had asked, incredulous. But even she, despite her protests, had softened when Perry had blinked at her calmly, his bill twitching in that unassuming way that made him seem both silly and endearing. The memory shifted, carrying Perry deeper into that first evening. He could see the backyard glowing in the fading light of dusk, the grass cool beneath his small webbed feet. Phineas had laughed as Perry wandered near the fence, Ferb quietly setting out a water bowl nearby. The air had been filled with the smells of summer, the sweetness of freshly mowed grass, the faint tang of barbecue from a neighbor's yard. Perry could recall how still the sky had looked, streaked with the last gold of sunset, a mirror of the stillness he felt within himself. In those earliest moments, Perry had understood something important. Though his secret life as Agent P would always pull him into hidden missions and late-night calls, this house was his anchor. It was the place he could always return to, the place where he could simply be Perry, a family pet, no questions asked. The memory softened into another. His first night in the Flynn-Fletcher home. He could see himself curled up in a small basket lined with blankets, the faint hum of the house surrounding him. The boys had checked on him several times, their whispers carrying through the darkness. "Do you think he's comfy enough?" Phineas had asked, his voice full of concern. Ferb had placed a hand on his brother's shoulder and nodded, offering his quiet reassurance. Perry had kept his eyes closed, tail flicking once in contentment, letting them believe he was already fast asleep. The truth was, even then, he hadn't felt alone. And as Perry drifted now, wrapped in the hush of the present night, those early memories played in his mind like gentle lullabies, each one carrying him deeper into his dreams. The dream shifted like a slow turn of a page, and Perry found himself remembering the little discoveries that came with settling into his new home. The Flynn-Fletcher house had so many corners, each one waiting to be explored, and Perry had taken his time making it his own. He recalled the first time he discovered the sunbeam in the living room. Morning light had spilled across the carpet, golden and warm, and Perry had waddled over to it curiously. The spot had been just big enough for him to stretch out comfortably, his teal fur glowing softly under the sunlight. Phineas had laughed when he saw it. "Look, Ferb, he found his favorite place already," he'd said. From that day on, the boys always left the curtain slightly open, making sure their platypus had his daily sunlit retreat. Then there was the sofa, an irresistible mountain of cushions. Perry had climbed it one paw at a time, his tail trailing behind, until he reached the very top. The boys had cheered as if he'd conquered some great expedition. Even Candace, walking through the room at the time, had paused long enough to smirk at the sight. "Well, I guess he's good at sitting," she'd muttered, trying not to let her grin show. Perry, of course, had simply blinked at her with his calm, unchanging expression before curling into the cushions as though they were made just for him. Another memory bubbled up, one filled with the sounds of summer. Perry remembered the laughter of Phineas and Ferb echoing through the backyard as they splashed in a makeshift pool. He had waddled close to the water's edge, tilting his head as if considering a dive. Phineas had encouraged him with eager hands, but Perry, true to his calm and steady nature, had simply dipped a paw in, felt the cool ripple, and pulled back. Ferb had chuckled softly, as though he understood perfectly. Perry wasn't the diving type, not when comfort was calling. Instead, Perry had settled himself nearby, tail stretched out lazily in the shade, watching over them with quiet affection. The memory shifted again, softer now, carrying him into the evenings that followed those bright days. He remembered how Phineas and Ferb would sometimes bring their inventions inside, scattering papers and tools across the living room floor. Perry had learned quickly to weave between them without disturbing a single piece, his small form moving like water around obstacles. He would curl himself nearby, a silent observer, the boys occasionally pausing to pat his head in passing. Those were the moments Perry treasured most, the times when he wasn't a secret agent or a clever problem solver. He was simply their platypus, sitting among the hum of creativity and invention. One evening stood out more vividly than the rest. Perry could see it now, a memory painted in dusky tones. The house had been quiet except for Candace, who was pacing the hall in her usual way. She had been muttering about busting her brothers when she spotted him sitting calmly by the staircase. She stopped, sighed, and bent down just slightly. "At least you don't cause trouble," she whispered. Her voice had carried more tired affection than annoyance, and for a fleeting moment Perry had seen the softness behind her determination. He had blinked up at her, silent as always, and she had given the faintest smile before continuing her march. Perry's memory lingered on that moment for a while, the image of Candace's brief tenderness etched gently into his thoughts. In her own way, she had cared for him too, even if she'd never say it aloud. As the dream continued to weave itself around him, Perry realized how these little memories, stitched together, formed the fabric of his life here. The Flynn-Fletcher house was not just a place to return to. It was a place that shaped him, a space where he belonged in ways that words could never fully capture. The dream deepened, and Perry's memories softened into the small, quiet rituals of family life. Not the grand inventions or noisy afternoons, but the gentle, everyday details that made him feel woven into the very heart of the Flynn-Fletcher household. He remembered the mornings first, Linda's footsteps in the kitchen, the faint rattle of pans, the smell of toast drifting through the air. Perry would pad in silently, tail dragging lazily behind him, and sit near the counter while Linda worked. She would glance down at him, smile knowingly, and sometimes place a small bowl of fruit or oats on the floor. "You got your own taste, don't you?" she'd say softly. Perry had never asked for much, but Linda always seemed to know how to make him feel included. Then there were afternoons filled with laughter and music. Phineas, inspired as ever, would sometimes blast cheerful tunes while sketching plans for his next idea. Ferb, quiet but attentive, would adjust knobs on the stereo until the sound was just right. Perry remembered the way the music would spill out into the house, bright and lively, bouncing through every hallway. He often pretended not to notice, lying sprawled out near the couch with eyes half closed. But inside, the rhythms and melodies stirred a deep contentment. It was as though the house itself was singing, and Perry was always listening. Sometimes Candace would join in, not always willingly. Often she was drawn in against her better judgment. He remembered one particular day when she was trying to call Stacy, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. Phineas had turned up the music. Ferb had added a light show with some gadget, and Candace had groaned in frustration. But Perry, sitting quietly nearby, had watched her break into an unguarded smile when Stacy teased her about having the coolest little brothers ever. Even when she protested, Perry could tell she secretly loved it. He had stored away that smile in his memory, rare and precious. The dream shifted again, bringing Perry to evenings under the backyard tree. He remembered the way the leaves swayed gently in the warm air, casting dappled shadows over the grass. Phineas and Ferb would often sit with him there, tired from a day of building, their tools forgotten for the moment. Perry would lie stretched out in the cool shade, his little bill resting against his paws while the boys leaned back against the tree trunk. They didn't always speak. Sometimes silence carried more weight than words, and Perry knew that silence well. In those still moments, he wasn't just a pet watching over them. He was part of their circle of rest. One particular memory lingered longer than the others, a stormy night, the kind that rattled windows and shook the branches outside. Perry remembered sitting near the window, his sharp eyes watching the flashes of lightning across the sky. Phineas had come downstairs, perhaps restless from the thunder, and found him there. Without hesitation, the boy had sat down beside him, leaning close as though Perry's quiet presence alone could steady the storm. Ferb had joined soon after, wordless as always, simply sitting on the other side. The three of them had watched the rain together, the storm raging outside but never breaking the calm they built inside. As the memory dissolved, Perry felt the same sense of comfort wash through him once more. He had been there for them in ways they never fully realized, and in return, they had been there for him. Not in words, not in grand gestures, but in the simple, steady companionship that turned a house into a home. The dream swirled softly, carrying Perry deeper into its embrace. His thoughts lingered not on battles fought or victories won, but on laughter, on sunlight spilling across the floor, on voices drifting through the house in tones of comfort and care. These were the memories that mattered most, the ones that reminded him why he returned here night after night, no matter how far his secret life carried him. The dream lingered now on the smallest of details, those little pieces of memory that seemed ordinary in the moment, but grew brighter with time. Perry drifted deeper into them, each one unfolding gently, as though the house itself was whispering back its history to him. He recalled the sound of Phineas's laughter echoing down the hallway, bright, uncontainable, and endlessly full of wonder. Ferb's steady footsteps usually followed, slower and quieter, grounding the energy of his brother's excitement. Perry had grown used to those sounds quickly, so much so that when the house was ever truly silent, he almost missed them. They were the notes in the melody of home, and Perry, silent as he was, felt himself part of that song. There were the moments with Lawrence, too. Perry remembered the man's calm voice, soft and thoughtful, as he told stories at the dinner table. Sometimes the tales wandered into history, sometimes into humor, and though Perry never reacted outwardly, he listened carefully. Lawrence had a way of filling the room with warmth, and Perry always felt that warmth lingered even after the plates were cleared away. And Linda, her presence was a constant. Perry could still recall the way her voice rose in song while she hummed along with the radio in the kitchen. Sometimes she'd twirl slightly, caught in the rhythm of her own melody, and Perry, sitting quietly by the counter, would blink up at her in appreciation. She never seemed surprised that he was there, as if she understood that even in silence, he was listening. That simple recognition meant more to Perry than words could capture. Another memory floated forward, an afternoon when Candace had been sitting cross-legged on her bed, scribbling furiously in her diary. Perry had wandered in, tilting his head at the sight. She had looked up, sighed, and whispered, "You wouldn't understand, Perry." Yet she had kept talking anyway, rambling about Stacy, about Jeremy, about her frustrations with her brothers. Perry had simply sat at the foot of her bed, his gaze steady and calm. By the end of her ramble, Candace had smiled faintly and said, "Thanks for listening." Perry hadn't needed to respond. His presence had been enough. The memory softened into one final recollection, glowing gently at the edges. Perry saw himself in the backyard at twilight, lying in the grass as the fireflies began to glow. Phineas and Ferb were lying nearby, looking up at the stars, pointing out constellations with unshakable enthusiasm. Candace had joined them reluctantly, muttering about wasting time, but she had stayed anyway. Linda had stepped out onto the porch with a glass of lemonade, her smile gentle as she watched her children together. Even Lawrence had wandered out, settling quietly beside her. Perry had been right there in the middle of it all, silent, steady, but undeniably part of the family. The memory wasn't tied to any grand invention, any mission, or any secret passageways. It was simply a moment of togetherness. The kind of moment that made Perry realize that, no matter what else happened, this family was his anchor. They didn't know the full scope of his double life, but they gave him something even more important, a home where he could rest, unburden, and simply be. The dream began to fade then, dissolving into warmth and shadow. Perry's breathing deepened in his sleep. His small body curled tighter in his bed. His tail shifted slightly, brushing against the blanket as though anchoring him to the present. And as the memories melted into quiet dreams, Perry carried with him the simple truth that had always been there. The Flynn-Fletchers were his family. Not because they knew every detail of who he was, but because they loved him anyway. And in the hush of the night, with stars watching from above, that love was enough to make his dreams peaceful, gentle, and endlessly warm. The night had deepened around the Flynn-Fletcher home. Upstairs, the children were tucked into their beds, the house had stilled into the rhythm of sleep, and even the neighborhood outside had quieted under the blanket of stars. For any passerby, it was a perfectly ordinary evening, peaceful and uneventful. But for Perry the Platypus, nights often carried an extra layer of purpose. His eyes flickered open from the shallow rest he had been enjoying. For a long moment, he lay still in his pet bed, listening to the faint sounds of the house, the steady tick of the clock, the creak of wood as it settled, the whisper of the breeze against the windows. Then, with the smallest of movements, Perry lifted his head. His gaze shifted toward the familiar wall across the living room. To anyone else, it was nothing more than a wall with framed photos and a small shelf. But to Perry, it was something more, a hidden doorway waiting. He rose silently, paws landing with practiced ease on the soft carpet. His tail followed with a muted thump, heavy but controlled, never disturbing the peace of the household. With a quiet press of his paw against the panel, the secret passage activated. A low hum stirred, and the wall slid open with a faint, mechanical sigh. Light spilled out, soft and cool, not harsh or glaring, almost as if even the entrance understood that this was a night for calm. Perry slipped inside, the wall ceiling shut behind him, leaving the living room once more in darkness. The tunnel beyond stretched out before him, glowing faintly with gentle blue lights along its edges. He padded forward, each step echoing softly against the smooth floor. Usually this path carried him toward urgency, alarms, sudden briefings, and the rush of a new mission. But tonight the corridor itself felt slower, quieter, as though even the agency had decided to breathe and rest. As Perry walked, he felt the familiar hum of the transport tube ahead. He stepped into it with ease, and the soft rush of air lifted him upward. Normally the ride was brisk, almost abrupt, but this evening it felt steady and smooth, more like drifting than launching. Perry's teal form glided upward until he emerged in the AUCA headquarters. The base was dimmer than usual, its lights turned low to mimic the calm of nighttime. Screens glowed faintly on the walls, their colors muted, their updates scrolling at a leisurely pace. Agents moved here and there, but none in a rush. Some carried files, others adjusted equipment, and a few simply sat at desks, sipping tea as they reviewed reports. It was not a night for missions. It was a night for routine. At the central monitor stood Major Monogram, his mustache casting a small shadow under the soft light. His usual bark of command was absent tonight. Instead, he leaned slightly over the console, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "Ah, Agent P," he said, glancing up as Perry approached. "You're right on time. I appreciate that." Perry adjusted his stance, giving his signature nod of acknowledgement. There was no urgency in his movement, no flash of dramatic readiness. Just the calm efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. "No big missions tonight," Monogram continued, his tone almost indulgent. "The city's quiet. Doofenshmirtz is... well, apparently he's working on some kind of device that makes soup taste better. Nothing threatening about that." He cleared his throat, tapping a few keys. "So your orders are simple. Check in, run through your evening routine, and get some rest. Even the best agents need their downtime." Carl, ever enthusiastic, appeared beside the major with a clipboard in hand. His voice carried more cheer than usual, softened by the relaxed atmosphere of the base. "We set up your quarters for the night, Agent P, fresh water, new blanket, and even a warm spot near the heater. Oh, and I left some snacks for you too, just in case." Perry blinked once, a subtle expression of gratitude. His gaze lingered on the headquarters around him, the calm glow of the monitors, the steady hum of the machinery, the absence of alarms. It wasn't often that his double life allowed for a quiet evening like this. For once, his routine wasn't about rushing into danger. It was about slowing down, keeping steady. and finding comfort even in the world of secret agents. And with that thought, Perry padded deeper into the headquarters, ready to embrace this gentle rhythm of his other life. The headquarters, usually bustling with flashing alarms and hurried footsteps, seemed transformed tonight. Perry padded softly across the smooth floors, his little webbed feet barely making a sound. Around him, other agents were engaged in their own quiet routines. A dog in a sleek uniform was slowly polishing a pair of goggles, his movements steady and deliberate. A rabbit adjusted files into neat stacks, pausing once in a while to sip from a steaming mug. Even the mechanical hums of the bass seemed subdued, more like a steady heartbeat than a rush of activity. Perry made his way toward his small quarters tucked along the side of the main hall. The room was modest, but it carried all the touches that spoke of quiet care. A low, neatly folded cot with a soft blanket waited for him. A dish of clean water shimmered faintly under the glow of the lights. On a side shelf, Carl had thoughtfully placed a small tray of snacks, berries, a few nuts, and even a couple of apple slices. The sight made Perry's eyes soften, a silent acknowledgement of the kindness behind the gesture. Before settling, however, he moved through the motions of his gentle routine. He stretched first, his paws reaching forward, his back arching slightly, tail swaying with the effort. He rolled his shoulders, loosening the tension that lingered after a day of stillness, then adjusted his stance with a quiet precision. It was not the rigid warm-up of battle, but the calming preparation of someone easing into rest while still maintaining discipline. Nearby, a small training chamber stood open. Perry entered, the space quiet and dim, the lights low and unobtrusive. He practiced a few simple maneuvers, rolling once, hopping lightly to the side, moving through the motions of balance and agility. Each movement was smooth, unhurried, almost like a form of meditation. His body remembered the patterns automatically, but his mind was allowed to drift. To others, it might have looked like practice. To Perry, it felt more like breathing. When he was finished, he returned to his quarters. He paused at the water dish, sipping slowly, the coolness refreshing against the calm quiet of the night. Then he glanced toward the blanket laid out neatly on the cot. He pressed a paw against it first, testing the softness, then settled down carefully. His tail curved around him as he rested his bill against his paws. From the hallway came the faint sound of Carl's voice, cheerful but hushed, speaking with another agent. Even the headquarters has to have calm nights, you know. Can't run at full speed forever. Perry listened without moving, his eyes half closed. The words seemed to capture the truth of the evening perfectly. Even a secret agency needed its moments of stillness. Major Monogram passed by once more, his steps heavy but unhurried. He paused at Perry's door and looked in, his mustache twitching slightly as he gave a nod of approval. "Good work, Agent P," he said softly, though no mission had been completed that night. Perhaps it was not about the work done, but about simply being present, steady, and ready when needed. Perry blinked in acknowledgement, a silent response that said more than words could. The room grew still again, the sounds of the bass fading into the background hum. Perry let his breathing slow, his mind drifting not into sharp focus, but into gentle release. This was his other world, one few knew about. But even here, amid the secret tunnels and glowing screens, he found a rhythm of peace. And as the night stretched onward, Perry embraced that rhythm fully, finding rest even in the heart of his secret life. Though Perry had settled briefly in his quarters, sleep did not claim him right away. For him, part of rest was not just lying still, but moving calmly through the little rituals that grounded his second life. With a small stretch and a soft push of his tail, he rose once more and padded back into the hall. The base was never completely asleep, but tonight it was quieter than Perry had ever seen. The large monitors on the walls glowed in gentle shades of blue and green, their updates scrolling slowly. Instead of flashing alarms, they displayed maps with calm, pulsing dots marking locations. Nothing urgent, nothing dangerous, just the steady record of the city at peace. Perry approached one of the terminals, his steps light and deliberate. With a small flick of his paw, he tapped a button, and the screen shifted to a log of recent activity. At the very top of the list, highlighted almost comically in bright yellow, was the name Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated. Perry tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly in mild curiosity. The report expanded, showing a photo of Doofenshmirtz in his lab coat holding up what looked like a large pot with steam rising from it. The description beneath it read, "Experimental soup Inator, designed to make soup taste slightly more delicious. Currently unsuccessful flavors remain average at best." For a moment, Perry simply stared at the entry, his expression utterly unreadable. Then, with the faintest sigh through his bill, he closed the report. There was no mission here, nothing to chase, nothing to battle, just a harmless, bumbling attempt at cooking through technology. It was almost comforting in its own way. From across the hall, Carl appeared once more, carrying a stack of files. He spotted Perry at the terminal and smiled warmly. "Oh, checking the logs, Agent P? Don't worry, it's all very quiet tonight. Honestly, I think Dr. Doofenshmirtz is more interested in seasoning than scheming right now." Perry gave his subtle nod in reply. He didn't need to say anything more. Carl lowered his voice as though sharing a secret. "It's nice, isn't it? These peaceful nights. We don't always get them, but when we do, they remind us that not everything has to be urgent." Perry blinked once, then turned back to the terminal, allowing the thought to linger in his mind. Carl's words carried a truth Perry himself felt but never spoke. That rest was as much a part of his work as action was. Continuing his quiet rounds, Perry moved to the training area once more. But this time he did not practice. Instead, he simply sat on the edge, watching the faint glow of the equipment. The mats were neatly rolled, the weights stacked in careful order. The silence of the room pressed around him like a comforting blanket. He could almost imagine it as another world entirely, one where time slowed, where the only sound was the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Eventually, he returned to the main hall and paused near a large window that overlooked part of the city. From this angle, the skyline glittered under the night sky, the lights twinkling like stars scattered upon the ground. Cars moved slowly along distant streets, their headlights tracing soft lines of motion. It was peaceful, utterly unlike the chaos that sometimes defined his secret missions. Perry's reflection in the glass showed him not as an agent braced for conflict, but as a quiet figure standing in calm observation. His teal fur looked muted under the dim glow, his small frame steady and composed. He let himself stand there for a long while, watching both the city and his reflection, until the moment felt as natural as breathing. When he finally moved again, it was not with urgency, but with the steady ease of someone who knew there was no rush. He returned to his quarters, slipping once more onto the soft cot, curling his tail around him. The bass hummed gently into the background, not intrusive, but soothing. And as his eyes grew heavy, Perry let himself feel gratitude for this. An evening where his secret life asked nothing of him but stillness. A night where even agents could simply be. Back in his quarters, Perry shifted slightly on the cot, adjusting the blanket until it draped just right over his small frame. He gave a quiet sigh through his bill, not of weariness, but of release, the exhale of some finally letting go of every last bit of tension. His tail curled protectively along his side, the tip twitching once before settling. The room around him seemed to dim further, though the faint glow of the hallway lights still leaked softly around the doorframe. It wasn't darkness that pressed in, but a kind of gentle twilight that made the space feel smaller, safer. The hum of the bass provided its steady backdrop, like a lullaby sung by machines. Perry's gaze drifted lazily across the little room. The tray of snacks on the shelf remained untouched, though he knew they were there if he wanted them. The water dish shimmered faintly, tiny ripples left behind from his earlier drink. These small comforts, so simple, so ordinary, were as vital to him as any tool or gadgets. They grounded his life of secrecy with moments of normalcy. He shifted once more, lowering his bill to rest fully against his paws. For a few breaths, he simply lay there, listening. From somewhere deep in the headquarters came the soft clink of Carl setting aside a mug. Further down, a drawer closed gently, followed by the muffled creak of a chair. Even Major Monogram's heavy footsteps, once constant, had faded entirely. The bass was winding down, its rhythm slowing into full rest. Perry allowed his mind to wander. He pictured Doofenshmirtz fussing over his Inator, muttering to himself about salt or spices. The thought almost made Perry's eyes soften with amusement. In his own way, Doofenshmirtz had given Perry something rare tonight, peace. There was no dramatic showdown, no alarms blaring, no chase across rooftops. Just an inventor, lost in harmless tinkering, leaving Perry free to enjoy stillness. His imagination drifted further, painting small fragments of memory like faded watercolor. He recalled the gentle warmth of Phineas's hand patting his head absent-mindedly after a long day, the sound of Ferb's quiet hum as he tightened a bolt on some invention, Candace muttering softly in her sleep as she turned over, the floorboards creaking beneath her room. These images flickered gently, not sharp and urgent, but hazy and soothing, like dreams half-formed. A deeper calm began to claim him. His breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of someone teetering on the edge of sleep. The steady rise and fall of his chest matched the background hum of the bass, the two sounds weaving together into a song of stillness. His eyelids grew heavy, blinking once, then again, before finally sinking into place. Even as he drifted, some part of Perry remained alert, as it always did. His ears still twitched faintly at distant sounds. His body still rested in a position that could allow him to rise quickly if needed. But that readiness no longer carried any weight. It was instinct alone, softened by the knowledge that tonight nothing would call on him. The headquarters seemed to exhale with him. The glowing monitors dimmed into a softer light, their movements slowing to a crawl. The hum of the machinery dipped into a lower, steadier tone. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, like the space between notes in a melody. And there, in that quiet, Perry the Platypus surrendered to rest. No disguises, no battles, no chases across rooftops. Just a small, teal figure curled gently under a blanket, the world around him safe enough to allow stillness. The night would move forward, the stars would drift across the sky, and morning would eventually return. Missions would come again, and Perry would rise with the same quiet determination as always. But for now, in this rare pocket of peace, the agent known as P was simply Perry, soft, steady, and utterly at rest. Far across town, while Perry was drifting into his agent's quiet rest, the lights of a tall, lopsided skyscraper flickered faintly against the night sky. On the very top floor, in a cluttered, narrow laboratory with pipes zigzagging through the walls, Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz paced back and forth. His slippers squeaked softly against the tiled floor as he muttered to himself, carrying a wrench in one hand and a steaming cup of chamomile tea in the other. Okay. This time it's going to work, he whispered, his accent thick as always, though much quieter than usual. No more explosions, no more loud noises, just a perfectly relaxing invention. One that will finally help me fall asleep. He took a dramatic sip of his tea, wincing at how hot it was, then pointed his wrench toward a massive contraption looming in the corner of the lab. The machine was tall, clunky, and unmistakably Doofenshmirtz. It had oversized coils on either side, a satellite dish tilted at an odd angle, and a giant glowing button labeled Sleepy Inator in big purple letters. A faint hum pulsed from within it, but unlike many of his past inventions, this one gave off an oddly calming aura. The lights blinked gently, almost like fireflies, and instead of whirring or clanking, it produced a soft, rhythmic hum that was nearly soothing. You see, Doofenshmirtz explained to no one in particular, though, as usual, he addressed the empty air as though giving a grand presentation. I, Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz, have always had trouble sleeping, ever since I was a child, back in Drusselstein, where we were forced to sleep standing up in the goat stables. I never got a proper bedtime routine. And do you know what that does to a person? It ruins them. So tonight, I shall fix it. He waved the wrench dramatically, spilling a bit of tea on the floor, then quickly dabbed it with his lab coat sleeve. He waddled toward the control panel, setting the wrench aside and pressing a few glowing buttons. The sleepy Inator will finally make bedtime relaxing. With the press of this button, soothing waves of calmness will spread across the tri-state area. The citizens will yawn, their eyelids will grow heavy, and they will all drift into peaceful, uninterrupted slumber. He paused for effect, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. And maybe, just maybe, I too will finally get a full night's sleep. He stepped back and clapped his hands softly. Of course, there's no evil plan here. I mean, yes, technically it's an Inator, but for once it's not designed to take over anything. It's just to help. Is that so wrong? No, it's self-care. As he spoke, the machine gave a soft ding, as if in agreement. The top coil began glowing faintly, and a small puff of lavender-scented mist drifted into the air. Doofenshmirtz sniffed and immediately sneezed. Okay, maybe too much lavender. We'll tone that down. But still, progress. He waddled over to the couch in the corner of the lab, an old, lumpy sofa with stuffing poking out of the seams, and set his teacup on the nearby table. The lab lights dimmed automatically, leaving only the gentle glow of the sleepy Inator filling the space with a soft rhythm. Doofenshmirtz pulled a blanket around his shoulders, sat back, and let out a long sigh. For the first time in what felt like years, the lab didn't echo with explosions, alarms, or Perry the Platypus crashing through the wall. It was quiet, peaceful, almost cozy. Ah, he murmured, his eyelids already fluttering. Yes, this is perfect. Finally, Heinz, you've done something for yourself. Something truly relaxing. His voice trailed off into a faint mumble as the machine hummed gently in the background, cradling the entire lab in its soft, sleepy aura. Down in the calm of his hidden headquarters, Perry stirred faintly in his cot. Though the world outside seemed peaceful, a familiar tickle of instinct brushed against him. The kind of instinct only an agent could have. His ear twitched. Somewhere in the city, a new energy pulsed through the air. It wasn't sharp or dangerous, but it was unusual. Perry sat up slowly, his teal fur ruffling as he stretched. His bill opened in a soft yawn before he slid from the cot. He padded toward the console where a faint light blinked across the screen. A message pulsed onto the monitor in glowing letters. Source detected. Doofenshmirtz, Evil Incorporated. The words faded, replaced by Major Monogram's weary voice. Agent P, I know you're technically off duty tonight, but there's some activity over at Doofenshmirtz's place. No alarms, no danger, just something. Probably another Inator. Better go check it out. Carl's voice chimed faintly in the background. But, sir, it's emitting frequencies that make me feel really sleepy. I think it's kind of nice, actually. Monogram coughed, clearly already yawning himself. Regardless, protocol's protocol. Head over there, Agent P, quietly. Perry gave his signature sharp chirr, then slid his fedora onto his head. With quiet efficiency, he opened the concealed passage and slipped into his hoverpod. The soft hum of the engine carried him up through the night air, blending with the stars above. Yet even as he soared toward the skyscraper, Perry could feel it. The same calming pulse Carl had mentioned. It was like invisible waves brushing gently against his fur, urging him to relax. His grip on the controls loosened slightly as his eyelids fluttered. But no, he shook his head and straightened. He had to stay alert. Moments later, he landed the hoverpod just outside the familiar crooked tower. A giant neon sign flickered faintly. Doofenshmirtz, Evil Incorporated. The building, usually lit up like a chaotic laboratory, looked surprisingly subdued tonight. Its windows glowed with a soft golden light, like a giant lantern floating in the city skyline. Perry crept inside through a service hatch, his webbed feet making barely a sound on the metal flooring. The corridors were unusually quiet. No clattering machinery, no ominous alarms, no wild muttering. Instead, a gentle hum seemed to fill the entire place. The air smelled faintly of lavender, carrying a calm so strong it almost made Perry's shoulders sink with comfort. When he reached the main lab, Perry froze in surprise. There was no grand scheme unfolding, no elaborate blueprints scattered across the floor. Instead, Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz was curled up on his old sofa, a blanket wrapped clumsily around him. His teacup rested on the side table, still faintly steaming. And towering beside him, glowing gently with pulsing lights, stood the sleepy Inator. The machine didn't spark or whir. Instead, it radiated waves of soft, sleepy energy, filling the lab with the aura of a lullaby. The lavender mist drifted lazily through the air, glowing faintly as it caught the light. Each puff carried the faintest chime, like a distant music box. Doofenshmirtz murmured in his sleep, turning slightly beneath his blanket. Yes, that's right. No goats in the stables tonight. Finally, he let out a faint snore, his mustache twitching with each breath. Perry tilted his head, his eyes narrowing lightly in suspicion. He tiptoed closer, glancing up at the Inator. Its glowing coils shifted colors from soft purple to pale blue, like waves of the ocean. Perry pressed a small button on his wrist communicator, scanning the device. Result: non-lethal. Calming frequencies detected. Induces relaxation and drowsiness. For the first time in memory, Perry's mission status returned a single, peaceful message. No threat detected. He blinked slowly, adjusting his hat. Doofenshmirtz, the man who usually filled the night with schemes and chaos, had built something harmless. Not just harmless, helpful. The irony made Perry's bill curve ever so slightly, the closest thing he ever showed to a smile. Quietly, Perry settled into a crouch at the edge of the sofa. His sharp, alert eyes softened as he watched Doofenshmirtz's chest rise and fall, the man lost in one of the deepest, most peaceful sleeps of his life. For once, there was nothing to stop, nothing to fix, only stillness. For a long moment, Perry simply stood there, his sharp eyes fixed on the man snoring softly beneath a tangle of blankets. He had seen Doofenshmirtz in countless states before, angry, frantic, gleeful, scheming, but never like this. The doctor's face, usually animated with exaggerated expressions, was slack with true rest. His jaw hung open slightly, and one arm dangled lazily off the side of the couch, fingers twitching every so often as if chasing dreams. The low hum of the sleepy Inator pulsed steadily, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. It washed over Perry in slow, invisible waves, carrying with it the scent of lavender and the faintest whisper of music box tones. Perry shifted uneasily, adjusting his hat. But even as he tried to resist, he felt his body surrendering to the calm. His muscles loosened. The tension in his shoulders melted. He had come here expecting conflict, a scuffle, a trap, an elaborate speech about some trivial vendetta. Instead, the lab felt almost like a sanctuary. Perry padded softly across the room, his webbed feet making no sound against the floor. He climbed onto a chair beside the sofa, resting his elbows on his knees as he watched Doofenshmirtz breathe. Each rise and fall of the man's chest was oddly grounding. The chaos of their usual encounters, lasers, blueprints, explosions, felt impossibly far away. Here there was only the glow of the Inator and the smell of chamomile and lavender and the quiet rhythm of sleep. Doof mumbled something in his dreams, turning over and hugging the blanket closer. No more. Goats in lederhosen. Yes, finally, peace. He let out a little sigh, followed by a tiny snore that almost sounded like a whistle. Perry tilted his head, the faintest of chuckles escaping him. A sound so soft it was gone almost as soon as it came. He leaned back in the chair, letting the hum of the Inator roll over him. His mind, always alert, always trained to be on guard, began to soften at the edges. His heartbeat slowed, syncing with the gentle rhythm of the machine. He closed his eyes for a moment, telling himself it was only to rest them, just for a second. The lab shifted around him in its dreamy haze. The lavender mist curled through the air like ribbons, catching the glow of the Inator's coils, which pulsed in soothing blues and purples. The entire room seemed to sway with the lullaby-like aura. Perry's head dipped forward slightly before he caught himself. He opened his eyes again, blinking slowly. Across from him, Doofenshmirtz let out another snore, louder this time, before rolling onto his back. His blanket slipped down, and without thinking, Perry reached out and tugged it back over the man's shoulders. The action was instinctive, gentle. There was no mission briefing that covered this, no protocol. But in this rare silence, Perry wasn't the agent, and Doofenshmirtz wasn't the villain. They were simply two figures sharing the same quiet night. The machine hummed again, stronger this time, sending a soft ripple of drowsiness across the lab. Perry blinked slowly, his hat sliding slightly to the side as his body slumped further into the chair. His mind drifted. Memories flickered. Days spent watching Phineas and Ferb build their inventions, afternoons in the backyard sun, quiet evenings perched on the windowsill. Now here in this strange, crooked lab, the same calm wrapped around him. He tried to resist. He was on duty, after all, but the thought felt almost silly now. His gaze drifted back to Doofenshmirtz, whose snores now rose and fell in comical little crescendos. Perry's bill curled faintly, another shadow of a smile. Finally, he leaned back fully in the chair, pulling his fedora down just slightly over his eyes. The sleepy Inator's rhythm seeped deeper into him, carrying him toward the edge of dreams. For once he allowed it. and in the quiet glow of the laboratory, a platypus and a scientist rested side by side, lulled into stillness by the invention that, perhaps by accident, was perfect in every way. The night stretched on, long and unbroken, carrying the laboratory in its steady embrace. Outside, the city pulsed faintly with life. Distant cars, the occasional bark of a dog, a lone siren far away, but here, inside Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated, none of that reached them. The sleepy Inator's soft hum was like a blanket draped over the building itself, shielding it from restlessness. The lavender mist drifted lazily in the air, glowing faintly against the crooked beams and scattered furniture. The coils of the machine pulsed rhythmically, shifting from cool blues to soft purples, like a lantern breathing. It was less an invention now and more a lullaby given form. Perry dozed in his chair, his head tipped forward, fedora casting a shadow over his closed eyes. His breaths came slow and deep, chest rising in time with the machine's pulse. Occasionally his tail twitched, or his bill shifted against his chest, but otherwise he was utterly still. Across from him, Doofenshmirtz sprawled on the sofa, snoring with a kind of reckless abandon. His blanket had half fallen onto the floor again, one foot poking out, sock slightly mismatched. Every so often, he muttered nonsense into the air. The llamas can ride the escalators. Yes, it's efficient. Then a deep sigh and silence again. Hours passed in this suspended calm. Time itself seemed softened, blurred at the edges as if even the clock hands were too drowsy to march forward. At last, the faint glow of dawn brushed the horizon outside. Through the high windows of the lab, thin stripes of morning light began to filter in, mixing gently with the Inator's lingering glow. The two lights blended seamlessly, one natural, one mechanical, until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Perry stirred first. His eyes blinked open slowly beneath the brim of his hat, adjusting to the pale morning glow. For a moment he was disoriented. The hum of the Inator still filled the room, steady as ever, and for the briefest of seconds, Perry felt as though he'd woken in some dreamscape. Then the familiar crooked walls came into focus, and his instincts settled. He glanced toward Doofenshmirtz. The scientist remained fast asleep, drooling slightly on the pillow he had stolen from the corner of the sofa. A faint whistle accompanied each exhale. Perry rose from the chair silently, his movements smooth and careful. His limbs still carried the weight of the Inator's aura, but he stretched them out, rolling his shoulders with quiet determination. He walked to the machine, tilting his head thoughtfully. For once there was no urge to dismantle it, no duty pressing him to flip a switch or cut a wire. The sleepy Inator had caused no chaos, no harm, only peace. Still he reached out and adjusted a small dial, turning down the glow until the coils dimmed to a gentle flicker. The mist thinned, and the room began to feel lighter, fresher, like the world itself was gently waking. Doofenshmirtz groaned faintly, stirring. His eyes cracked open, bleary and confused. What? Perry the Platypus? Is it morning already? He sat up clumsily, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. His hair stuck out in odd angles, and his lab coat had bunched up around his shoulders. Perry tilted his head, letting out a soft chirr of greeting. Doof blinked at him, then at the machine still humming quietly behind them. Oh, you didn't destroy it. His voice was scratchy with sleep, but his expression was one of faint surprise. I guess you didn't have to, huh? It wasn't evil this time. Perry gave a firm nod. His bill curved in the faintest smile. Doofenshmirtz stretched, yawning loudly, before collapsing back onto the sofa with a sigh. You know, I actually feel rested. That never happened. Not since... Well, probably since I was 5 and had that bunk bed with the stuffed panda. He paused, squinting at Perry. This might be my first successful Inator, Perry the Platypus. Can you believe it? Perry adjusted his hat, watching him quietly. For once there was no chase, no trap, no chaos to resolve. Only a morning sun rising slowly over a city that had, for one night, been wrapped in quiet. Doofenshmirtz pulled the blanket back over himself, already half dozing again. Maybe I'll just market it as a sleep aid. Not evil, just cozy. His words trailed into a mumble, then faded into another snore. Perry gave a soft chirr, almost like a laugh. He turned, heading toward the exit hatch, his tail swaying behind him. As he slipped back into the hoverpod, the glow of the dawn stretched wide across the sky, painting the city in gold. The sleepy Inator hummed faintly behind him, guarding the last fragments of night's peace. For once, Perry left Doofenshmirtz's tower without a fight, only with the knowledge that not all inventions, not all nights, had to end in chaos. Sometimes, even in the unlikeliest of places, stillness could be found. And as the sun rose higher, the platypus allowed himself a rare, lingering calm. The morning sun had fully risen by the time Perry returned to the Flynn-Fletcher house. The golden light draped itself across the familiar neighborhood, washing over rooftops and quiet streets. Birds hopped from branch to branch, chirping softly, their voices carrying a freshness that came only with the early hours of the day. The hoverpod landed quietly in its concealed spot behind the house, folding back into its unassuming disguise. Perry hopped out gracefully, his tail dragging lightly against the grass, and took a slow, deep breath. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint sense of morning dew, freshly baked bread from a distant bakery, and the faint trace of garden flowers beginning to open. For Perry, these moments were the most grounding. Missions and gadgets, battles and traps. All of it seemed to fade the moment he stepped onto this patch of lawn. Here in this backyard, there was no grandiose scheme to unravel, only family. He padded softly toward the back door, slipping inside with practiced ease. The house was quiet, still wrapped in the last threads of slumber. Sunlight filtered through half-drawn curtains, casting delicate patterns across the floor. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, a clock ticked steadily. Perry paused, ears twitching. He could hear the gentle rhythm of breathing, his family still lost in dreams. He moved with the care of a guardian, climbing the stairs one careful step at a time, pausing only to let the old wood settle beneath his weight. At the top of the stairs, the house opened into its familiar hall. He turned first toward Phineas and Ferb's room. The door creaked faintly as he pushed it open with his bill, just enough to peek inside. Phineas lay on his back, sprawled across his side of the bed, his bright red hair sticking out in every direction. His blanket was half kicked to the floor, as though in the middle of a dream he had wriggled free of it. Yet his face was calm, his expression serene. Beside him, Ferb slept much more neatly, curled on his side with his hands tucked beneath his cheek. His breathing was even, his chest rising and falling with the precision of a clock. The sight made Perry's chest swell with a quiet warmth. He stepped silently into the room, picking up the edge of Phineas's fallen blanket and draping it back over him with care. Phineas stirred slightly, mumbling something unintelligible, before sinking deeper into his pillow. Ferb didn't move at all. His steady rhythm of sleep was so deep it seemed unshakable. Perry lingered by their beds for a long moment, his eyes softening beneath the brim of his fedora. He had always been their pet in name, their companion in form. But in his heart, he was their protector. Every night spent away on missions, every chase through the city, every brush with danger, he always carried this picture with him. This house, these rooms, these children safe and dreaming. It was the reason he fought, the reason he endured the chaos. He turned quietly, letting the door close behind him with barely a whisper. His steps carried him to the next door down the hall, Candace's room. He nudged it open carefully. Candace lay curled beneath her comforter, hair spilling across her pillow like a fiery halo. One arm was stretched out over the bed's edge, phone still loosely in her grip, screen dark and lifeless. Her breaths came soft and steady, her lips parting ever so slightly with each exhale. Perry tilted his head, watching her for a long moment. She often stormed through the house, her voice sharp with determination, as she tried to bust her brothers. But here, in the stillness of sleep, all of that melted away. She looked younger, more fragile, as though the weight of her worries had slipped off her shoulders for the night. Gently, Perry padded closer, nudging the phone from her fingers with his bill. It dropped onto the nightstand with a soft thunk. Candace stirred faintly, mumbling something about Jeremy before turning over and sinking back into the depths of her dreams. Perry gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, then pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. She snuggled into it instinctively, sighing softly. Leaving her room, he moved toward the last door, the one that belonged to Linda and Lawrence. He hesitated at the threshold, listening. The faint hum of their gentle snores filtered through the door, accompanied by the soft murmur of the ceiling fan. He didn't enter. There was no need. It was enough to know that they were resting peacefully. Instead, he padded back down the hall, finding his way to the small landing that overlooked the staircase. He sat there for a while, his tail curled neatly beside him, gazing at the closed doors that protected his family. To anyone else, he was simply a platypus. But to himself in this moment, he was more than that. He was their guardian, their silent watcher, their shield against the world's chaos. And so he remained there, still and vigilant, as the morning sunlight spread through the house like a promise of safety. Perry stayed at the top of the stairs for some time, the sunlight growing stronger as it spilled through the windows. The once cool air of dawn warmed gradually, carrying the scent of dust motes, drifting lazily in golden beams. Down below, the house remained still. He could hear the refrigerator cycle again in the kitchen, the faint creak of the wooden frame as the yanning air shifted, but otherwise, all was quiet. His sharp eyes roamed the hallway. Each closed door was not simply a boundary, it was a promise. Behind one, the boys who built impossible machines with unshakable joy. Behind another, a sister with a fierce heart that beat with equal parts love and determination. And beyond, the parents who unknowingly provided the shelter that allowed their children to dream. To Perry, this house was a fortress, not in its walls or locks, but in the bonds it held. He adjusted his fedora with a gentle tap and rose to his feet, padding softly back toward Phineas and Ferb's door. Something about their room always drew him in, as though the brothers' energy lingered even in sleep. He peeked inside again, watching them, and his mind wandered back through the nights he had returned from long missions, sometimes bruised, sometimes drenched from some elaborate water trap, sometimes still buzzing from the adrenaline of escaping an Inator seconds before detonation. Every time, no matter how rough the mission had been, he would come back here, back to this room, to reassure himself that the boys were still safe, still dreaming. He remembered one particular night clearly. He had been caught in a particularly elaborate contraption of Doofenshmirtz, a spinning cage suspended above a vat of something neon green and bubbling. It had taken every ounce of his strength and wit to escape. By the time he returned home, dawn was already breaking. He had slipped into the boys' room, exhausted, his muscles aching, only to find Phineas mumbling in his sleep about building a roller coaster, but bigger. Ferb had stirred only enough to pull the blanket higher around his chin. The memory filled Perry with that same warmth now, the reminder that all his efforts, every mission, every chase, were not in vain. They were for this, for them. He pulled the door shut quietly again and moved toward Candace's room. The girl often wore her anxieties like armor, clashing with her brothers or fretting about her place in the world. Perry had watched her through all of it, silently observing, never interfering but always present. He had seen her heart in action, her love for her family beneath her frustrations, her devotion to Jeremy, her occasional softer moments when no one was looking. Once after a particularly long mission, Perry had returned to find Candace asleep on the couch, phone in hand. She had been waiting for her mother to come home, determined to report her brother's latest invention. But sleep had claimed her instead, and Perry had simply tugged a blanket over her, letting her rest. The house had been calm that night, and the boys had been upstairs, lost in their own world of dreams. Now, watching her sleep peacefully, he remembered that moment. She was so determined to prove herself, to be seen, to be right. But here she didn't need to prove anything. She could just be Candace, a girl resting safely in her own bed. Perry padded back into the hall, his paws making almost no sound on the wooden floor. He sat again, letting the memories wash over him. He thought of Linda's occasional lullabies when the children were younger, drifting faintly through the house. He thought of Lawrence telling long, winding stories, his voice calm and steady like the tide. He thought of small family dinners where laughter spilled across the table, unguarded and real. Perry's job as an agent was filled with chaos. Explosions, battles, ridiculous inventions, endless surprises. But his purpose was found here, in these quiet, fleeting moments of safety. The morning deepened. A car drove by outside, its tires whispering against the road. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and was hushed again. The world was waking. But inside the Flynn-Fletcher house, time seemed to slow. The family remained tucked away in dreams, and Perry remained where he always was in these hours, watching, listening, guarding. The brim of his fedora cast a shadow across his eyes, but the glimmer beneath was gentle, proud. This was his family, and as long as he was here, they would never know the dangers he faced to keep it this way. The stillness of the morning began to stir, shifting like a dream into wakefulness. Perry, seated at the landing of the staircase, was the first to notice. It was subtle at first, the faint rustle of sheets, the low creak of a mattress, the sleepy sigh of someone turning over in bed. The house had its own rhythm, its own way of slowly stretching itself awake. From Phineas and Ferb's room came the muffled sound of a yawn, long and unhurried. Perry tilted his head. Through the door he could just make out Phineas's cheerful murmur. "Ferb, I know what we're going to do today." The words trailed into a half-dream state, not yet fueled by the spark of invention, but laced with the warmth of routine. Ferb, ever the quiet counterpart, only shifted, his movements neat and efficient, even in the drowsy haze of waking. Perry's eyes softened. Every morning seemed to begin the same way, with boundless curiosity ready to burst into action. He wondered, not for the first time, how the boys' imaginations never seemed to tire, how they always woke with the same sense of possibility. It was a rhythm as predictable as the sunrise. From the other room, Candace let out a muffled groan. She turned over in bed, pulling her blanket up over her head. 5 more minutes, she whispered into the pillow, her words muffled. A familiar ritual. The outside world might rush forward, but Candace always tried to bargain with time, clutching at just a little more rest before facing the day. Perry padded quietly to her doorway and peeked inside. The fiery mess of her hair had grown even more unruly as she shifted, her phone now hanging precariously at the edge of her nightstand. He stepped closer, nudging it back with his bill so it wouldn't clatter to the floor. Candace stirred but didn't wake, her breath still deep and even. Down the hall, the faint sound of a door opening came at last. Linda stepped into the hallway, stretching her arms with a long, soft yawn. Her robe trailed behind her, and her eyes were still heavy with sleep. She moved with the ease of a mother used to mornings, slow, steady, already thinking of breakfast even before the first pot of coffee. She didn't see Perry as she passed, her gaze still lost in thought, but he watched her descend the stairs with a quiet assurance. Lawrence's voice followed a moment later from their room, gentle and groggy, asking something about the time. Linda answered in her usual calm tone, and the creak of the stairs echoed faintly as she reached the bottom. The house was waking, its heartbeat quickening, but Perry remained in his post. He didn't need to move, didn't need to do anything more than be present. His family stirred in their own ways, unknowing of the quiet figure who ensured they could greet each day without fear. He thought back to countless mornings like this one. Times when he had returned just before dawn, times when he had been away longer than he would have liked. No matter the circumstances, the pattern never changed. He always found his way home to watch over them as they woke. There was a profound comfort in it, the simplicity of a mother humming faintly in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes beginning to prepare breakfast, the muffled voices of children negotiating who got the bathroom first. Even Candace's sighs of annoyance or complaints about being woken too early were part of it. These were the sounds of a family alive, whole, safe. And Perry, though he could never reveal his full role, took strength in the knowledge that he helped keep it this way. He shifted slightly, his tail brushing the polished wood of the landing, and let the sounds of life fill his ears. Upstairs, Phineas had begun to chatter, fully awake now, his voice filled with bright excitement about some new project. Ferb responded in his usual quiet murmur, words too soft for Perry to catch, but carrying a tone of steady agreement. Candace groaned again, pulling her blanket tighter. "You guys better not start anything today," she muttered, though the threat carried little weight in her drowsy tone. The corners of Perry's mouth twitched upward, a platypus's version of a smile. The day was beginning, and like every day before, he would stand guard, quietly, invisibly, making sure his family's laughter and worries alike unfolded in peace. The morning had fully settled in now. Golden light spilled through the curtains, casting shifting patterns across the floor as the house woke completely. Perry sat quietly at the foot of the stairs, his fedora low over his eyes, watching the familiar morning routine unfold like a play he knew by heart. From the kitchen came the comforting sounds of Linda at work, the rhythmic clink of plates being set out, the low hiss of the coffee pot, and the warm hum of a tune she absent-mindedly sang under her breath filled the lower floor. It was a song Perry had heard before, though it had no name, one of those melodies parents carry unconsciously, tied to their memories and care. Lawrence joined soon after, padding into the kitchen with slow, measured steps. His voice, soft and steady, drifted upward as he greeted his wife. There was a quietness to his tone that matched Perry's own silent dedication. He was not loud or commanding. Instead, he grounded the family with gentle steadiness, the kind of presence that needed no fanfare. Above, the bedroom doors began to open. Phineas and Ferb emerged first, the spark of invention already twinkling in Phineas's eyes, even though his hair was still a mess of sleep. "Ferb," he said brightly, "I have an idea." His voice carried easily down the hall, and Perry tilted his head, amused at the inevitability of it. Ferb, with his quiet nod, trailed after his brother, already prepared to assist in whatever grand scheme would come next. Candace's door opened last, with far less enthusiasm. She stepped into the hall, squinting at the brightness, her blanket still draped around her shoulders like a cape. Why does morning even exist?" she mumbled to no one in particular, but her voice softened as she heard Linda's cheerful call from the kitchen. "Breakfast in 5 minutes." That phrase alone seemed to give Candace just enough energy to shuffle forward, her grumbling subsiding into the usual rhythm of her day. Perry remained still, unseen in the quiet corner of the hall, watching it all unfold. This was the heartbeat of the family he protected. Each voice, each routine, layered together into a chorus of ordinary life. The sound of laughter, of footsteps on the stairs, of chairs being pulled at the breakfast table. These were the very things that gave his secret work its meaning. His thoughts drifted back to missions past, to times when he had faced danger or been caught in the chaos of another one of Doofenshmirtz's inventions. The world outside this home could be unpredictable, messy, even perilous. Yet here everything moved in harmony. He had fought tirelessly to make sure it always would. The boys' laughter echoed as they rushed downstairs, Ferb silently steadying Phineas as he nearly tripped in his excitement. Candace followed, still muttering about their ridiculous ideas, but her words lacked true venom. Linda greeted them warmly, setting down plates of breakfast. Lawrence adjusted his glasses, smiling at the sight of his family gathering. And Perry, as always, lingered on the edge of it all, not needing to join, not needing to reveal anything more, simply watching, ensuring, protecting. The brim of his fedora cast a familiar shadow across his eyes as he adjusted it slightly, a subtle gesture of contentment. He could step away soon, perhaps to rest, perhaps to prepare for another day of secret missions, but not yet. For now, he remained in place, soaking in the quiet joy of a family safe in their own home. For them, the day was just beginning. For Perry, it was another mission accomplished, though they would never know, and that was how it should be. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle symphony of life in the Flynn-Fletcher household. The kind of sound that could lull even a watchful guardian into peace. The segment closes with Perry perched quietly, calm and vigilant, his heart steady in the knowledge that his family was safe. The day in the Flynn-Fletcher household moved forward with its usual rhythm, bright chatter, clinking dishes, and the sound of laughter mixed with small disagreements. To anyone else, it was just another day. But for Perry, it was more than that. Every ordinary detail was proof that his family lived without fear, unaware of the dangers he faced quietly behind the scenes. Now, as the sun sank lower in the sky, the colors of evening stretched across the neighborhood. The once bright blue of the afternoon softened into orange and violet, casting long shadows through the backyard. A light breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. It was the kind of evening that whispered of calm. Perry padded slowly through the house, his movements unhurried. His duties for the day had ended, and there was no urgent call from Auka, no alarm summoning him into action. Tonight there was nothing but the quiet gift of rest. He could already feel the weight of it in his limbs, that slow pull of fatigue gently urging him toward stillness. The boys had retreated to their room, already sketching plans for tomorrow. Their voices rose in bursts of excitement, punctuated by Ferb's short, steady replies. Perry lingered in their doorway for a moment, watching them with fondness. Their inventions were endless, their energy boundless, but even they would soon drift to sleep, and with them, the world outside would quiet. Candace, on the other hand, had long since retreated to her room. Her phone glowed faintly in the dark as she scrolled absent-mindedly, her expression torn between irritation and amusement at something on her screen. She muttered under her breath, sighing with dramatic flair, before finally setting the device aside. Perry gave her a small glance before moving on, knowing she too would surrender to rest in time. Downstairs, Linda and Lawrence spoke softly in the living room. Their voices were like a gentle hum beneath the quiet of the evening, warm and steady. Lawrence chuckled at something his wife said, his laughter low and calm, and Linda's answering tone carried the kind of ease that only comes when the day's work is done. Perry slipped past them unnoticed, heading toward his own small corner of the house. His pet bed, simple and round, sat tucked neatly in the corner of the living room, where shadows pooled in soft curves. It wasn't grand, not like the beds he had seen in other homes, but it was his. It was where he belonged. He circled once, twice, then settled down into the familiar space, his body sinking into the soft cushion. The brim of his fedora tilted forward as his eyes grew heavy. For a moment he remained alert, listening to the layered sounds of the house, the distant chatter of Phineas and Ferb, the faint creak of stairs as Linda tidied something upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator. All of it blended together into a lullaby. Perry closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. The warmth of the evening air seeped into the house, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing matched the cadence of the world around him. He could feel sleep gathering at the edges of his awareness, tugging gently, patiently, as though assuring him it was safe to let go. And for Perry, safety was always the key. He had spent so many nights awake, watchful, ensuring peace. But now he knew everything was in place. His family was safe. The house was still. The stars outside had begun to appear one by one, their quiet shimmer guarding the night alongside him. He sighed softly, a small, contented sound, and allowed his mind to drift. In the quiet of his dreams, the world softened even further. The edges of memory blurred into something timeless. He no longer felt the pull of missions or the weight of responsibility. Instead, he drifted into the gentle comfort of what he had always wanted, peace. The Flynn-Fletcher home glowed faintly in his thoughts, warm and inviting. He saw the faces of his family, content and smiling, framed by the light of an eternal sunset. He felt the hush of the backyard breeze, the glow of the stars, and the comfort of knowing he was not alone. And with that, Perry let go, sinking deeper into the embrace of rest, his dreams carrying him into a place where duty and peace finally met. The house grew quieter as the evening deepened. One by one, the voices upstairs faded. First, Candace's sighs softened into silence. Then Phineas's lively chatter slowed into a drowsy murmur. Ferb's steady footsteps crossed the room once, and then all was still. From the kitchen, the final click of a light switch signaled that Linda and Lawrence had turned in as well. Perry lay in his bed, his body curled comfortably, the familiar brim of his hat just barely tipped over his eyes. The air inside the house felt different now, thicker, calmer, like a blanket draped across every corner. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed slower, as though time itself respected the quiet of the night. Sleep came easily, and soon Perry drifted into dreams. At first, the dream was simple. He found himself in the backyard beneath sky heavy with stars. The grass glowed faintly silver in the moonlight, and the air was cool, still. He padded slowly across the yard, but instead of the fences and houses of the neighborhood, he discovered wide, open fields stretching endlessly. The world felt larger than it had ever been, but not overwhelming. gentle, safe, as though inviting him to wander without worry. In the distance he saw shapes that were familiar yet softened by the haze of dreaming. Phineas and Ferb stood at the edge of the field, their figures outlined in a glow that was neither sun nor moon, but something softer, kinder. They weren't building or inventing this time. Instead, they simply sat on the grass, pointing up at the sky. Perry padded closer, and when he reached them, the boys leaned against each other sleepily, eyes half closed but still smiling. They did not speak, but their presence said everything. In this dream, there was no rush to invent, no wild bursts of energy, no chaos, only peace. Perry curled beside them, his fur brushing against their shoulders, and together they gazed upward at the endless night sky. Then the scene shifted. As dreams often do, it happened seamlessly, gently. The field stretched further, and suddenly he was not with the boys, but standing before Doofenshmirtz Tower. Yet even here the world was not sharp or chaotic. The building glowed warmly, its usual awkward edges softened by dreamlight. Doofenshmirtz himself appeared, holding something small in his hands. It wasn't an Inator this time. It was a cup of tea. Steam rose lazily from it as he looked at Perry and gave a sheepish shrug. "I don't know what I was building," he said, his voice muffled as though wrapped in cotton. "But I think it was just supposed to help me sleep." He chuckled at his own words, and Perry tilted his head, amused. In this dreamscape, even his nemesis was calm, not plotting or yelling, but simply existing. Doofenshmirtz sat cross-legged on the floor, sipping his tea, and the tower itself seemed to hum like a lullaby. Perry joined him, sitting across the room, and the two shared a silence that felt less like rivalry and more like understanding. The dream drifted again. Now Perry was by a river that glistened under starlight. The water moved slowly, smooth and endless, carrying fragments of memory along its surface. He saw reflections, small moments of his secret life, missions completed, inventions disarmed, narrow escapes, all floating past him like leaves on water, yet none of it felt heavy. Instead, it was as though the river carried away the weight of duty, leaving only the satisfaction of having done enough. Perry lowered his head to the cool surface and watched the ripples spread outward. In the reflection, he saw not himself as Agent P, but simply as Perry the Platypus, quiet, loyal, content. As the dream deepened, the edges blurred further. The stars above shimmered brighter, the river's glow stretched wider, and the gentle sound of flowing water merged with the steady beat of his own heart. Everything was soft, everything was calm. In that space between memory and imagination, Perry felt what he always fought for but rarely allowed himself to experience, the luxury of complete, unshaken peace. The dream deepened, like a tide pulling Perry further into its embrace. The gentle river faded, its soft ripples dissolving into a new vision. Now he stood in the Flynn-Fletcher living room. Though it did not look quite as it usually did, everything glowed faintly, as if the walls themselves carried the light of fireflies. The furniture seemed softer, rounder, like clouds shaped into familiar things. The ticking clock on the wall moved slowly, almost lazily, each sound stretching like a yawn. Perry padded forward, his small claws tapping quietly against a floor that shimmered faintly under his weight. The family was gathered there, but not in the ordinary way. Phineas and Ferb sat on the couch, heads tipped together, their sketches scattered across the cushions like feathers. They weren't designing anything, just letting their pencils move in loose, looping shapes that melted into the glow. Candace lay curled up on the rug nearby, a blanket draped lazily over her. She stirred slightly, muttering something about busting in her sleep, but even her words carried no frustration, only drowsy amusement. Linda hummed softly in the kitchen, though her movements were slowed to dreamlike motions. She set down cups of cocoa on the counter that never cooled, the steam curling upward in patterns that looked like stars. Lawrence read a book at the table, but his voice rose gently, not in speech, but in a soothing hum, as if the words themselves had transformed into lullabies. Perry took all this in, each detail filling him with a warmth that spread through his chest. In this dream, he was not sneaking through secret doors or chasing villains. He was simply here, part of the family, part of their stillness, wrapped in their comfort. He hopped onto the couch beside Phineas and Ferb, curling into the space between them. The boys looked down at him and smiled without speaking. Their smiles seemed to say, "You don't need to be anywhere else tonight," and Perry believed them. The dream shifted once more, but not suddenly. It melted, like one calm song blending into the next. The living room slowly dissolved into an open field again, but this time the family was there with him. They sat on a blanket beneath a sky overflowing with stars, each brighter than the last, yet none of them harsh. The stars looked like fireflies had flown high above and chosen to stay there, frozen in their glow. Phineas pointed upward with wide eyes. "Look, Perry," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Every one of those stars is a wish." Ferb nodded silently beside him, while Candace rolled her eyes half-heartedly, but even she couldn't hide her smile. Linda and Lawrence leaned together, their faces content, their hands folded comfortably. Perry tilted his head up, watching the endless sparkle of the night. Something stirred within him, something both familiar and new. He had spent countless nights watching over them in silence, but here, in this dream, he realized that perhaps they also watched over him, not with awareness of his secret, but with the simple, quiet love that filled their home. Doofenshmirtz appeared at the edge of the field, not intruding, but simply joining. He carried a pillow far too large for his frame, dragging it behind him comically. I figured I'd stay here tonight," he mumbled, his voice unusually soft. He lay down a short distance away, his awkward presence somehow fitting perfectly into the scene. Perry blinked at him, then closed his eyes again, unbothered. In dreams, even enemies could share the peace. Yeah, the stars above shimmered brighter, and Perry felt himself sink deeper into calm. The blanket beneath him felt softer, the air warmer, the presence of his family steady and protective. He yawned quietly, the sound barely audible, and nestled closer against Phineas's side. The dream folded in around him like a quilt, layers of light and memory and comfort overlapping until they became one. He felt no urgency to wake, no pull to return to duty, only the steady beat of his heart, the soft rise and fall of breathing around him, and the weightless drift of sleep carrying him further into serenity. Here under the stars of his own imagination, Perry the Platypus finally rested, not as an agent, not as a protector, but simply as himself. The stars shimmered above Perry, and slowly the dream began to fade into something even quieter. The shapes of the family, the soft glow of the blanket, the faint outlines of Doofenshmirtz drifting off a little ways away. All of it dissolved like mist in morning light. What remained was only stillness. Perry now floated in a space without edges, without sound except for the slow rhythm of his own breathing. It wasn't lonely. It was comforting, like resting at the very heart of calm itself. His body felt lighter than air, his mind uncluttered. There were no missions left to run, no disguises to maintain, no gadgets to use, just the essence of sleep. He curled a little tighter, his small form glowing faintly against the soft darkness. It was the feeling of being wrapped in safety, of knowing that the world could turn without him for a while, and that was okay. The quiet held him the way a gentle tide holds a drifting shell. For a moment, Perry stirred, some instinct reminding him of the world outside, of the Flynn-Fletcher house, of all the places and people he quietly protected. But even that thought was hushed almost immediately. Tonight there were no duties. Tonight there was only rest. As the dream reached its deepest point, Perry exhaled softly. The sound was like a tiny sigh, barely there, but in that breath was an entire story. A story of loyalty, of balance between chaos and calm, of a platypus who lived two lives but who here and now was simply allowed to sleep. The last images of the dream shimmered faintly. A starry sky, a quiet river, the smiles of family, the soft hum of peace. Then they dimmed, not abruptly, but gradually, like lanterns flickering low at the end of a night. At last, there was nothing but a gentle darkness, calm and warm, cradling Perry in its embrace. The house around him was utterly still, the world outside quiet, and inside his heart, all was settled. He was safe. He was home. He was asleep. And so the night comes to its softest close. Perry the Platypus, both pet and protector, rests without worry. His family sleeps peacefully. The stars shine silently above, and the world holds steady until morning. As you listen, may you also drift into your own calm, carrying with you the same quiet warmth Perry feels tonight. Every breath slower, every thought gentler, until all that remains is the soft rhythm of sleep. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be peaceful. May your rest be deep. And may you wake refreshed with the morning light.